All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are diving into one of the biggest, oldest, and most important debates in the history of human thought, the relationship between law and morality. And trust me, this isn't just some dusty old academic argument. This is a real-world conflict that has toppled governments, started revolutions, and continues to shape our lives every single day.
So let's boil this entire massive debate down to one single question. It's a question that has kept philosophers and judges up at night for over 2,000 years. Sounds simple, right? But the answer is anything but. Here it is. Must a law be moral to be considered a real law?
And right out of the gate, you've got the two main teams in this epic debate. First up, you have the natural law folks. Their answer is a clear, loud yes. For them, law and morality are two sides of the same coin. You can't separate them. An unjust law isn't just a bad law. It's not a law, period. Then you have the legal positivists. They say, whoa, not so fast. The answer is no. They argue that whether a law is valid is one thing, and whether it's moral is a totally different question. A law can be perfectly valid, but also completely evil.
Okay, so let's dig into this conflict a little deeper and really get to the core of what sets these two ways of thinking apart. This phrase right here, this is the battle cry for the natural law side. Lex injusta non est lex. An unjust law is not a law at all. It was first made famous by the Roman statesman Cicero and then picked up by the great thinker Thomas Aquinas. For centuries, this simple phrase has been used as a powerful weapon against tyranny. It's this incredibly potent, radical idea that a law without justice at its core is basically a fraud. So where did this idea of a higher law even come from? This notion that there's a law that sits above the laws of any king or any government? Well, for that, we've got to go way, way back to its ancient roots. Think about the ancient Greek Stoics, and later Romans like Cicero. They looked at the universe and saw order, they saw reason, and they thought, hey, there must be a true law that's kind of baked into the fabric of reality itself. This wasn't a law that people just made up. It was a universal, eternal law that you could discover using your own mind. It was a rule book for humanity that applied to everyone, everywhere, no exceptions.
Fast forward a few hundred years, and the medieval philosopher Thomas Aquinas comes along and just organizes the whole thing. He creates this brilliant four-level pyramid of law. At the very top, you have eternal law. That's God's master plan for the whole universe. Below that is divine law, the stuff revealed in Scripture. Then comes natural law, the part of God's plan we can figure out just by using our own reason. And finally, at the very bottom is human law, all the day-to-day laws that governments pass. And here's the kicker. This is the whole point of his system. For any of those human laws down at the bottom to be legitimate, they have to line up with the natural law right above them. If a government passes a law that goes against fundamental justice, Aquinas says it's not just a bad law, he calls it a perversion of law. Basically, it's a broken, twisted thing that doesn't deserve the name. All right, so let's jump forward again. As we move into the Enlightenment, this idea of a higher law starts to evolve. The foundation begins to shift away from God and more towards the power of human reason itself. And this brings us to the philosophical heavyweight Immanuel Kant. He argued that morality isn't about divine commands, it's about pure reason and duty. His massive contribution was the categorical imperative. Now, a simple way to think about it when it comes to law is this. You must always treat other people as having worth in and of themselves, not just as tools to get what you want. So for Kant, any law that violates that fundamental respect for human dignity isn't just immoral, it's literally irrational. Now let's fast forward to the 20th century, where an American legal philosopher named Lon Fuller gives natural law a fascinating modern makeover. He basically said, you know what, let's stop arguing about the moral content of every single law. Let's zoom out and look at the whole system. Let's ask if the process of making and applying law is itself moral. Fuller's big idea was that for any system of rules to even earn the name law, it has to follow certain rules itself. So he came up with a kind of checklist, a set of 8 minimum requirements that he called the inner morality of law. And here are just a few of those rules. Laws need to be public, no secret laws. They have to be understandable. They can't punish you today for something that was legal yesterday. Now, just think for a second about a government that breaks these rules, with secret laws or rules that are impossible to follow. Fuller's point is that this isn't just a government with bad laws. It's a system that has failed so completely at its basic job that you can't even call it a legal system anymore.
So, this is where it all stops being theoretical. This is where these big ideas smash into the real world with life or death consequences.
This is the legendary Hart-Fuller debate.
and it was sparked by a real and really disturbing case from after World War II. A German woman had reported her husband to the Gestapo for criticizing Hitler. Under a Nazi statute, that was a crime. Her husband was sent away, but amazingly, he survived. So after the war, she was put on trial. And her defense? Hey, I was just following the law. Wow. So, what does justice demand here?
This is where our two big theories collide head-on. Lon Fuller, our natural law champion, argued the whole Nazi regime was so corrupt with its secret rules and arbitrary terror that it wasn't a real legal system at all. Its so-called laws were invalid. On the other side, the positivist H.L.I. Hart completely disagreed. He said, look, as ugly as it is to admit, the Nazi law was technically a valid law. But, and this is a huge but, it was so morally monstrous that no one should have obeyed it. For Hart, it was absolutely crucial to be able to say, yes, this is a law, and it is too evil to be obeyed.
Then, just a few years later, another huge debate erupted, this time in Britain. A government report suggested that what consenting adults do in private really isn't the law's business, and recommended decriminalizing homosexual acts. Well, this recommendation ignited a massive public argument.
On one side, you had Lord Devlin. He argued that a shared public morality is the social glue holding society together, and the law has every right to protect that glue, even behind closed doors. But H.L.A. Hart fired back, using the famous harm principle. He said, look, the only legitimate reason for the law to step in is to prevent direct harm to other people. Using the force of law to enforce a particular moral code, he argued, was just a dangerous abuse of state power.
Now, these debates weren't just talk. The unbelievable horrors of the Second World War led to this massive global revival of natural law thinking, and it completely reshaped our modern world.
Get this. This quote comes from Gustav Rodbrook. And what makes it so powerful is that before the war, he was one of Germany's leading legal positivists. But after living through the Nazi nightmare and seeing how valid laws were used to commit atrocities, he did a complete 180. He argued that his old philosophy had left the guardians of justice totally unarmed against evil laws.
And Radbrook wasn't alone. In the years right after the war, the international community moved incredibly fast. They created a whole new architecture of international law, and the philosophy pumping through the veins of all of it was pure natural law.
I mean, just look at the language in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It talks about inherent dignity and inalienable rights. Think about what that means. It's saying your rights aren't a gift from a government. You have them simply because you are human. They exist on a higher plane, above and beyond the laws of any single country. That is natural law in action.
And this all culminates in this incredibly powerful idea in international law called jus cogens. You can think of it as the ultimate super law for the entire planet. These are the non-negotiable, fundamental rules, things like the bans on genocide, slavery, and torture. No country ever is allowed to violate them. It is the modern world's version of an unjust law is not law at all. And while people still debate how to enforce them, the fact that these norms even exist is a massive victory for natural law theory.
And so that brings us right back to where we started, but now the stakes are so much clearer. If a law is passed following all the proper procedures, but it violates a core human right, where does its authority truly come from? Is it from the process, the fact that it's on the books, like the positivists would say? Or is there a higher universal moral law that binds us all? That fundamental tension is what keeps this 2,500-year-old debate as urgent and important today as it ever was.